Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 123, and the album for today's episode was from a suggestion from my favorite subscriber, that being Stormrider. It was suggested to me, and since of course for Dusty Hill I covered El Loco, which was released in 1981, and since it had already reached its 40th anniversary, it just seemed fitting that that would be at least a decent album, or just a good enough album to kind of at least to use as a way to pay tribute to, of course, Dusty Hill of ZZ Top. So today, this album is going to be done in the same sort of way, since this album has already reached its 30th anniversary, and since given who's the singer on this album, and given that since he of course had passed away on July 26th, you know I'm talking about Mike Howe of Metal Church. And of course the album in question here is of course his second album that he had recorded with Metal Church, which was The Human Factor, which was originally released on March 26th, 1991 through of course actually their only album through Epic Records. It was their, because they had just left Elektra, but this was their first album after leaving Elektra, and it's their only album being on Epic. And of course it was produced by Mark Dodson, who had been working with them since The Dark, when David Wayne was the singer for the band. Of course, Mark Dodson has done a lot of production work and engineering work for a lot of great metal bands. Obis from Spain and a couple other Spanish metal bands, and of course Judas Priest on Defenders of the Faith. So everything, it all just seems to really come together here. But I'm choosing this album, of course, again, it's based off a suggestion, and since again it's reached its 30th anniversary, and so this is the album that just seems to be more fitting to really kind of use as my way to really further pay tribute to, of course, the Metal Church's fallen comrade, that being Mike Howe. So I guess let's just definitely get into, of course, the whole history here. Since I actually had already covered Blessing in Disguise already on this channel, was as part of US Power Metal Month, because of I always kind of consider Metal Church as sort of crossbreed between more heavy, just straight up heavy traditional metal, and a little bit of thrash, but also definitely US power metal. I always kind of put them in that sort of same category. So they kind of fit in almost with at least a lot of bands, for example, like Vicious Rumors, for example, is probably the one band that really, I guess, would definitely come to, would come to at least mind here as far as comparisons, and even Liege Lord, especially some of the more later albums from Liege Lord. Definitely, for sure. But, of course, Iced Earth is another band, but I'll just keep it there. But still, I always kind of put them in sort of, just in that sort of same category, so I just thought they definitely fit in as part of that month back in 2016 of like April, where I was just reviewing a bunch of those kind of albums, and just Metal Churches fit in, and I covered all three of their albums. And so this right here, it just seems also great fitting, so it kind of continues where I kind of left off there back in 2016. But either way, let's definitely just at least begin, since Mike Howe had replaced David Wayne, and he debuted on the Blessing in Disguise. Again, he had just left Heretic too, before joining Metal Church. Again, I also covered that album too. Breaking Point from 1988, just a year before he decided to join Metal Church. And of course, we also know the story how basically Heretic and Metal Church just swapped singers, because when David Wayne decided to join Heretic, they changed he changed the whole entire name to Reverend. So there, that was kind of interesting. So that's a little interesting fact to add in. But there you go. There's a little history also to what happened with David Wayne after Metal Church. So again, he debuts for Blessing in Disguise, and it was a very good debut. It actually showed how Mike Howe definitely fit in with Metal Church. I mean, I wouldn't say he's as similar to David Wayne, but he was probably the best fit for that, because he really, at times, it's almost kind of striking, especially when I was re-listening to the human factor here, is how at times Mike Howe can be almost at times a little similar to David Wayne, even though David Wayne had his own distinct voice, his own distinct tone to his his own distinct style of singing. But Mike Howe is almost at times in that sort of same caliber. So he really kind of holds his own, but at the same time, I do have to really, when I'm revisiting some of these albums, especially like Blessing the Skies and this album right here, The Human Factor, it's just something how the band really changed. It sounds like Metal Church, but you can just tell how more mature and more just, I guess you could say, a lot more tighter they just got more. And of course the lyrics, which I'll touch on some of the lyrical content for The Human Factor and just how they changed in terms of the lyrics, because earlier on, a lot of the lyrics at times were definitely more kind of typical of at least the sort of 80s metal scene, especially the underground metal scene, in terms of like either stuff about the gods, like mostly war, battle, and even at times maybe a little bit of horror, and of course typical sort of, for example, like dark lyrics, whatnot. Here the lyrics on The Human Factor are dark, but a more social commentary way of being dark, and not really something like we're trying to be spooky kind of dark. Here everything's got a more different tone to it, but still everything, again, The Blessing in the Skies, it really was a great debut and really showed off a lot of Mike Howe's talents to at least the Metal Church audience, and it really kind of showed that he definitely fit right in. It was a great album too, nonetheless, but it really was a great taster. But I have to say, as great as Blessing in the Skies is, I think everything just came into form. Everything just came in full force on this album right here, The Human Factor. This right here is like it took everything, whatever Blessing in the Skies it's set out to do, but this album right here just went and took things even further. This really, if anything, could very well be, to me personally, and maybe to most other folks too, is probably the absolute best album with Mike Howe on vocals for Metal Church. This is like the crowning achievement. This is their magnum opus. To me, I always kind of felt with David Wayne and Metal Church, if I have to kind of at least somewhat give my actual thoughts, is I've always kind of felt that The Dark might have been the best album with David Wayne on vocals with Metal Church. But of course, I always kind of go back and forth between that and the first album, because I've seen some people slag on The Dark. I always kind of thought, to me, The Dark was probably one of the best albums from Metal Church. But Mike Howe definitely seemed to took things a step further with the guys, and of course the lyrics really just changed the overall too. The overall, just the tone. It really reshaped Metal Church's stance on when it comes to lyrics and writing. It really kind of pushed them even further through as far as what they can do, and it really kind of, at least, it was perfect for at least the 90s. It was perfect. So it wasn't the 1980s anymore, but they still kept a lot of the overall riffs and the compositions were still the same sort of beast as some of the classic Metal Church albums. It's just that the lyrics were a lot more changed up, but I think it ended up being a great fit because it just made Metal Church almost, I would say a lot of people consider them to be like, thinking man's metal, basically. And that's probably the best description for at least this album right here. So let's definitely waste no more time. This album right here, of course, again, released back in March 26 of 1991 through Epic Records. Again, it was recorded back in 1990, actually, at the Devonshire Studios in Burbank, California. And of course, again, with Mark Dodson as the producer. And so, mastered, of course, at Sterling Sound. Again, released in March 26, 1991. And so, for the songs on this album, we have at least about 10 songs on this album. And it all clocks in at least 51 minutes and 35 seconds. So, these 10 songs are, it begins with the title track, Date with Poverty, The Final Word, In Mourning, In Harm's Way, In Due Time, Agent Green, Flee from Reality, Betrayed, and finally ending with the Fight Song. So there's your 10 tracks. And this is an absolute powerful fucking banger from Metal Church. And when I say powerful, I'm not meaning like it's power metal, but just an overall, just the overall emotions. They're just flowing through this entire album. It's just surging through this album. It's why I will use the term powerful. Because this is definitely not for your average metal listener. This is definitely for those who really want something that might be a little intelligent in some cases. You know, by today's standards, some will probably look at some of these lyrics as like, oh, what a bunch of old fucking boomers. But at this point in time, this was almost thought-provoking because of this really, in some cases, it really kind of made you think in some cases, well, in terms of how to present, and everything does come from a street level standard of a streetwise standard is what I'm trying to at least say. Everything just has that, and of course Mike Howe's performance is even better than it was on Blessing in the Skies. This album is like where he really pushed himself to the limit. This is why I kind of compare him a little bit to David Wayne, because David Wayne really pushed himself too on like The Dark. And so it's kind of the similar sort of fashion. But I think in many ways, this might be a more mature effort, and at times a more realized effort than like compared to The Dark, even though I love The Dark. But this sound just really is a more realized effort, and they just sound like they're completely into it. They're giving it every bit of their all into this album. This is just their crowning achievement as at least a band here. Everything from at least just the overall, the riffs, the energy that they're putting into it. Just everyone just sounds like they're in top shape here. This is easily some of the strongest material for them. But let's definitely, before we really get in any further, let's definitely touch on a lot of the lyrics, since I definitely alluded to the fact that how their lyrics change from being more spooky dark to being more social commentary like dark, where everything just, it's a lot more in line with at least what was going on, or at least what was surrounding them in at least the late 80s, early 90s, and what was kind of brewing within around the world, especially within the United States. So it touches a lot of serious topics on this album. I mean, one of the really big, before we really get into one of the really bigger serious topics I really want to kind of touch on, we do have, again, as far as political topics, The Final Word is definitely one. Date with Poverty kind of has its very political topics too, even though that's more about how it is to be a struggle to actually live on your own, I guess. How it's a struggle to kind of make money for to kind of pay your bills and pay rent and so on, and how it's not very easy to do so. And so it's basically just a struggle of living, basically the struggle of living. In Due Time, I think it's the similar situation too there, though I always kind of thought, I think when I'm listening, or just deciphering the lyrics, I'm almost kind of wondering if Due Time is also at times about loan sharks. But it's not as completely vague about it, but it definitely seems to really deal with at least, again, more struggles on paying, and sometimes how it can be even more, takes a tougher, more darker turn in terms of trying to kind of make money to live on your own. You know what I mean? So I think that I almost kind of get that from In Due Time, but I can't really pinpoint. Maybe some of you might actually know what is the true sort of meaning in for the lyrics in Due Time. Agent Green is, again, part of the more political stuff. This one really seems to be either about the greed of the government or the overall conspiracies of the government. But I almost kind of think of it as seem to really be more about the overall greed of the government to begin with. So Flee from Reality is probably a similar situation with at least Date with Poverty and In Due Time. So everything really seems to really kind of really touch on a lot more. And again, that's probably why they call the album The Human Factor and named it after one of the songs, which I'll definitely get to The Human Factor, but everything about at least the whole overall title of at least the album in general fits in with a lot of the themes for a lot of the songs on this album. It's really about the struggles of being a human, and I guess just living in, just living, and in terms of what's surrounding you, in terms of the news, in terms of just overall, just your overall surroundings. It really does kind of at least speak on a really sort of dark and somewhat deeper way, basically. And so that's kind of how why I also use the term powerful to describe this album. But let's definitely get into at least also songs, for example, like The Human Factor, which is not political, but it seems to really be more of a taking a shot at least at the time, rap music. This is why I probably will say that if a person nowadays, let's say someone around at least 20 years old and is listening to this track, they will definitely would just deem these guys as just a bunch of old boomers and can't seem to really get past that the music industry is changing and what's being allowed by at least the music industry and what they're signing and which kind of artists in terms of what their ideas or styles are is changing, and their style, again, what Metal Church plays more, typical sort of straight up natural guitars, drums, bass, vocals, and that's it. No other sort of I guess you can say interesting cheeky stuff, I guess. Like, for example, what they're talking about and why they're going after rap music in this song is because of overlapping already used material, like for example, Vanilla Ice and Ice Ice Baby, which he took, of course, Under Pressure from Queen and basically just overlapped his sort of vocals over it and basically turned it to a whole new song. That's what their overall argument is in the track, and how that's basically ripping off one another's artists. Even though I don't know if fucking Brian May, or even at the time, I guess whenever the track came out, if I can't even remember when the song even fucking came out, or even looked up the information when that track came up. I don't know if Brian May or even Freddie Mercury, if he hadn't died yet, if he complained or anything or had any issues with that, or even fucking David Bowie. I don't know if any of them had any fucking issues with it, but I get where, as from a creative standpoint, since Metal Church obviously is one of those guys that really tend to really more focus and really put more effort into coming up with their own material, their own lyrics, their own riffs, at least just the overall organicness of the writing. I can kind of see why they probably felt a little bit insulted by at least certain rap artists, at least just taking an already recorded track, but then I guess recording it, but then taking parts of it and overlapping their own sort of vocals over the track. So I guess there's an argument there that you can kind of at least agree with, but at the same time, I guess nowadays their argument that Metal Church is obviously at least opposing here basically is, or proposing, I guess is a better word to use, might be petty. So I guess there's that. But there's still other very interesting topics. Like Betrayed actually deals with alcoholism and how bad it can be to be an alcoholic, especially with the sort of, whether, again, since at the point of the time of the 1980s, seeing, I guess, what happened with Bon Scott. And, of course, the overall, I guess, what Ozzy Osbourne wrote with Suicide Solution. This is basically Metal Church's, at least their stance on the whole thing. This is their sort of, just their argument basically to it. They're them just adding their own 2 cents onto it. So that so Betrayed really just tends to really deal with the struggles of being an alcoholic and trying, or at least struggles of being sober, and especially someone who's obviously trying to put down the bottle, but knowing that how tough that can be, and since usually withdrawal syndrome can be a real issue with that. You can definitely can deal with withdrawals when trying to stay sober and not touch another bottle, at least, or just another drink of alcohol, like being, again, it be either wine, beer, or liquor, or even fucking whiskey, you know, anything of that. Anything that's alcohol related, basically, that's a beverage. So that's what Portrayed seems to really deal with. So again, the struggles of staying sober. But speaking of more kind of at least interesting topics, though, before I really get into one of the main ones, let's definitely get into at least a song like The Final Word here, since I kind of forgot about this one. This one definitely seems to really deal with, it's more political here. This one is back to being more political on this particular track. But this one is more so their response to, of course, at the time, the controversy of the flag burning in, they're saying 1991, but this album was being recorded in 1990. So it's just the overall concept of basically flag burning and whatever was going around, whatever was the overall subject in at least 1989 or 1990 in terms of the overall war between either, I think, at least it seemed to have been, was it Israel or Iraq? One of those countries, we were beginning to actually start, at least go to war with them. And so there's always the fucking controversy of the flag burning. And that's what The Final Word really tends to really deal with. So it's really about the overall, just overall what issue it can be if you were to really take your freedom, liberties, and take it even to a more, I guess, really darker direction. So it's really about the overall really overdoing it with your liberties as when it comes to freedom. So that's what at least The Final Word definitely seems to really deal with in terms of its topics. In Harm's Way, since this will come after In Mourning, which I'll definitely somewhat touch on, In Harm's Way, the topic for this track really goes even more deeper in terms of really, I guess, struggling when growing up, basically. It really tends to deal with the topics of, for example, here, which obviously it's already beaten to the head what it's about, basically, the overall issues of how harmful it is and for at least child abuse and what it affects has on at least the child's mental stability, basically, and how it can affect the child growing up. So this really does deal with child abuse. And since the one of the main antagonists in it is actually a female mother, a mother basically, obviously, who's either taking her frustrations out on her own little boy, on either it be basically I don't know, her fucking ideas is basically, oh, this is you're the reason for me going alcoholic. You're the reason for why I'm obviously in a bad marriage. Whatever, you know, just any sort of example for basically to use as why the mother will take out her own fucking frustrations on a child and how that will affect the child's mental stability. So that's what In Harm's Way seems to be its topic. So it's a really deep overall, since at the time, I think a lot of child living and everything really was kind of, it was really kind of becoming a more concern at this period. So that's why, obviously, they wrote the song as a response to that. So it's really deep shit for this song. But speaking of deep stuff, let's go into In Mourning, which is painfully obvious when you're listening to the track what it's about. It's obviously their response to, of course, the James Vance versus Judas Priest trial in Reno, Nevada in 1990 over the whole situation that took place, I think, in 1988. When the two kids were playing Stay in Class and heard, of course, Better By You, Better Than Me, their cover of the Spooky Tooth track, and decided to just blow their heads off, basically, or let's try, whatever. When you're watched that case back, again, I think I've touched on it before. They were fucking idiots. Them and the parents were fucking idiots, too. And they were almost for a typical Reno Nevadian hicks, who obviously thought that they can use their little boy's son's fucking situation, his issue, because he fucking fucked his face up, and can say, oh, because obviously they must have been in poverty, and they wanted to kind of use I guess the Judas Priest, who was obviously still one of the most biggest high-paid fucking bands at the time, and like, well, we could probably get some money out of this. And of course, that fell completely flat because of what they were trying to present to at least the judge and to at least the jury. It completely bit every bit of them in the ass. And again, from all the stories that just came out to there, how much that the two fucking kids were complete little assholes and were going around either doing slingshotting fucking all sorts of stuff at either animals. They were just terrorizing the fucking neighborhood, basically. And the parents were no good either. And of course, they were pilling up their kids. And apparently, the mother tried to fucking lie in front of the judge about if this was the reason for why your kid is obviously acting the way that he did, and might have had the thoughts that he might have heard or whatever he got from at least the songs and stained class. And they just try to say, oh, the fucking playing it backwards made me go out and grab my fucking parents' shotgun and try and blow my fucking head off. I'm coming out a little mean-spirited, but at the same time, they were idiots. That's all it was. And so this song right here was Metal Church's response to all of this, basically saying how these parents were blaming music on their child's or just their kids' mishaps instead of blaming it on their neglect. Basically, on obviously it's like, well, I guess the sticker is responsible for all my sons this way when you probably should have paid more attention to what your son did before you actually cared. So that's the overall gist of it, and so really it's really a lot of good arguments. Some folks today will look at some of these songs as being old boomers, just complaining about shit in the world. When you got songs like In Harm's Way and In Mourning, and especially with like either Date with Poverty, and even Betrayed, with these songs, there's a lot of deeper stuff than really just a bunch of old boomers. I would say it would be wrong to call these guys boomers at this point, especially some of these songs as boomer stuff. There's a lot of stuff there's a lot of still good arguments, and a lot of these topics for like either, for example, like In Harm's Way and Betrayed and Date with Poverty are still they are still good arguments today. They are still true to this day than they were then. So really these songs really obviously are still have meanings today than they probably would have did in 1991. So again, everyone still struggles with at least trying to stay sober. Everyone's trying to struggle in terms of making a living in this world. And of course, In Harm's Way, everyone still deals with at least child abuse. Everyone still does. And how bad of a situation get and how tough it can be to even get out of a situation like that, of just a toxic, really just a overall harsh and really hurting situation as a kid. It's really tough to get out of those kind of situations. So these songs still have meaning today than they did back in 1991. So that's why you really have to kind of look at some of these songs as still very deep. So everything is still true to this day than they were in 1991. But again, very good metal album. A lot of just great riffs. I really love the compositions and everything. This is just a great album though from Metal Church, and of course Mike Howe's vocals, every bit. My God, he was fucking great on this album. He really nailed every bit of at least the songs that he sung on this album. Everything's just great. So there we go. Just a classic album overall. I know I definitely at least went in a little bit, but you know what? Again, topics and whatnot, and what the topics are for some of these songs. You know, I have to at least explain some of them and just give my overall 2 cents on some of the topics on these songs. Again, it really is one of those kind of albums. It's a great, powerful album, and it's definitely one of Metal Church's finest albums. So there we go. Again, this was the album that I, of course, based off a suggestion. It was a great suggestion to further use as my tribute to, of course, Mike Howe. Just to pay more tribute to at least a guy who, obviously, for 55 years old, it just seemed too soon still. And especially for a guy who was still in great shape and was still at least moving around and he still kept his voice intact. Still, if you listen to at least the stuff he sang on for like XI and Damned If You Do, he just sounds, he sounded great. He was still in great shape. He just sounded great. So there we go. It's obviously a sad situation and very just unexpected. So there we go. Again, this album, it's already reached its 30th anniversary. So if you want to revisit this album, or you feel like you have to revisit this album, go ahead and do so. And again, if you have any thoughts about this album when you first heard it, or when you heard it whenever you did, whether those thoughts, again, are either positive or negative, you can leave them in the comment section below. But if you have any sort of, if you haven't even heard this album, I guess, what I was also going to say is, if you haven't heard this album, and really want to, again, still try and check on an album to kind of pay tribute to at least Mike Howe, I mean, you definitely should check out this album. I mean, this is definitely one of the best albums of Mike Howe on vocals with Metal Church. Still, it's a fucking good album. So there we go. That's it. Hope all of you enjoyed. This is Every Thrash Sing. I'm out. And I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.